So it's a pleasure to welcome you all to our second talk of today's program. Will be delivered by Volodymyr Vakhitov. Um, Dr. Vakhitov is an associate professor at the American University of Kyiv. He also holds a PhD in economics from the University of Kentucky, which is not too far from us here in Bloomington, Indiana. We consider the University of Kentucky both a friend and a rival, so it's quite fun to have that sort of in our orbit. Dr. Vakhitov's talk today is entitled, "Why Do People Not Evacuate from Dangerous Zones?" So welcome, Dr. Vakhitov. If there's anything else you'd like to say about yourself, please. I'm sure I've left out many important details, but without further ado, the floor is yours. So Volodymyr, so far we're not seeing you and we're not hearing you. Ah, there you are. Now we see you. Oops, I think we had a connection. Oh, here we go.
Indeed, I have some severe problems with the connection right now. I don't know what's going on. If I disappear, it's probably I will just reappear again in a minute.
Okay,
my usual computer has broken down, and this is a very old computer, so I just do whatever I can now. So I'm sorry. As Sarah said, this is the study of the Institute of Behavioral Studies. We actually started in the last year. Even before we opened the Institute, we started this study in May. The war was yet in the very hot stage, and lots of people had to evacuate. And by that time, we had lots of stories from volunteers and from local administrations that some people don't want to leave despite they are being shelled. And we were trying to understand what was going on. We had some interviews with those volunteers. And it turned out that the major reasons is probably behavioral. That means people don't want, not because they don't have money, not because they don't have nothing to eat or not where to live. People don't want to evacuate just because there was something irrational about this. And we decided to understand if it's possible to change the behavior somehow. So we conducted a little experiment. It's pretty interesting information, and it might be relevant communications if needed. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Yes. So sometimes your internet connection is not stable, so I don't know what's going on. Okay, this is the team of the researchers. We collected some initiative, which is called Behavioral Scientists for Ukraine. Some people from Nottingham, some people from AUK, the woman from New York University, Abu Dhabi was the initiator of everything. And we decided that we have to deal with non-willingness of people to evacuate somehow. So it's just very difficult to evacuate everybody, or even the majority, because the routes can be closed, because the roads can be closed because there is not enough transportation, but also sometimes it's just extremely difficult to persuade people. Even when the Russian army came to Irpin, and there was still a chance to evacuate a lot of people, many people did not want to evacuate from Irpin. I don't know if you were there. There are several buildings which are very heavily shelled, and there are some buildings which are almost destroyed. And still, people lived in those buildings, and they didn't want to leave. And when the volunteers came, they said, well, it's all right so far, it's bearable, we can stay here. And then when the situation became really critical, they started calling to volunteers and asking them to evacuate them immediately, and it was already too late. So this is also some kind of a behavioral problem here. So people refuse to go at the moment of danger, And the question is why and what was going on. So we found that actually there is not much research on evacuation during the wartime. There are some papers on evacuation behavior during the natural disasters like hurricanes and fires, and mostly of this is obviously American. There was some English literature. There were a couple of studies from Israel, but we have not found any big study on evacuation of civilians during major conflicts, neither from Lebanon, neither from Yugoslavia, neither from Syria, nothing like that. I don't know if there were any evacuations. Even from the World War II, there was no literature which would study something like that. So we decided that this was something new. Maybe there was something not in economic, but maybe in history, but in terms of the psychology of people, economic behavior of people, choices, we haven't found anything like that. So we decided that we need to help policymakers, and just having one step ahead, we presented the study to Donetsk Oblast administration, to the Department of Social Protection, and they literally used some of the findings from the study to help their volunteers and to help their workers to persuade people to evacuate. We explained how to do that in a little bit better. It's kind of very marginal changes, but still. And we try to understand why people leave, why people stay, why people return. And the next wave of this study is going to be about how to get people back to Ukraine, because a lot of people who left, some of them might return, but they have completely aberrated, completely wrong, completely different perception of danger. And we will also discuss this. It's just we can see this in this paper as well. I don't say that the danger is not present, but I think that for some cities, danger is clearly exaggerated, and this is also a perception. This is not how it looks. It was my personal story. We evacuated from Kiev to Vinnytsia, and Vinnytsia is about 4 hours from Kiev. Or if you are very adventurous, you can make it in 5. But actually, there are 2 major roads. The one which is in blue, we decided that it was it was dangerous to go by that road, and we were kind of right, because in this part of the road, which was partially already controlled by the Russian troops, and some people who took this road in different days end up actually killed. So we decided to take the road which went approximately like this one, maybe around here, but something like that. But still, it would take normally about 4 hours. So this was our way. It took us 14 hours on the 3rd of March to evacuate from Kiev, through all the block posts and through all those queues and lots of traffic, lots of hassle during the road. So you could basically imagine that if you drove by car, it was kind of a tedious and very long drive. And we had a child on board. We picked up a family in Abukhiev. We didn't know about them before, 2 days before. So it took us a little bit longer time than we actually had to take. But still, it was very, very long drive. And as you see, the green areas are those which were controlled by the Russian troops in the first month of the war. They withdrew by the end of March, but still in the beginning of the war, basically the period when the war was in effect, it was very much unclear how the war would proceed and what was going to happen. You see that the Russian troops came to Kiev very closely. Actually, this was like outskirts of Kiev already. And I wouldn't say there was panic in Kiev, but I would say that a lot of people seriously considered leaving, because there were some rumors that if Russians came further, they can surround Kiev, and then they're going to be really massacred. So this was a very dangerous situation, at least perceived as dangerous. And we conducted the survey in those areas which were affected by the war, except Donbass, which was since it's impossible to get to people to Donbass, and except Kherson, because Kherson was occupied at the moment of Kherson Oblast was almost completely occupied during the survey. But still, we're talking about the east of Ukraine, the north of Ukraine, and a little bit of the south, and plus Dnipro, which is not exactly touched by the war right now, but it is heavily shelled, so there was some danger that the Russians would come there as well. So this is the area where we have the study. This is how roughly the areas are represented in the country before the war. This is how they were represented in our study. You see that Kiev is a bit overrepresented, but everything else is more or less. Kiev and Oblast, they are kind of almost together, they're almost the same as everything else. So we try to have this more or less representative as of pre-war population. The pitfalls of the study is probably that we ask only urban population and only adults between 18 and 60. So we don't know anything about behavior of the older population. We don't know anything about rural. We need a better sample for that, but it would be completely different story, different money, different terms. So we wanted to have this quick and dirty. So we decided to have some like first glance of what was going on. The survey conducted some, we collected some social demographic characteristics, which are kind of standard, and also a little bit of the evacuation stories. When they left, what kind of risk and concerns they expected along the way, both those who left and not those who did not, who made decisions about evacuation, whether they returned back home or not. And actually, a lot of people already returned by the end of July when this was done, end of July last year. And also, those who stayed, we also asked them about risk, concerns, who was helping them, did they consider leaving? And we found several pretty interesting details. And also, we conducted a behavioral experiment. The idea of the experiment, I will explain a little bit later. The idea was that we framed people with different messages, and we saw how those messages actually worked, so that we tried to understand if it's possible to affect people's behavior simply with messages about evacuation and what should be in these messages. And this is how we decided to help the local officials. So we followed some old previous demographic studies. We found that during the natural disaster, some demographic factors played the role. And also there was some response to the warning alerts. So how people responded to the evacuation messages. Actually, there were no evacuation messages in the first week of war. So it's a little bit not relevant, but later they actually appeared. And also we found that people respond to the risk, to the perception of the risks, but it turned out that a war presents quite different risks compared to the natural disasters. Even though in both cases there is a risk of death, the perception of this risk is quite different. I will explain later again what it is. So during the wartime, nobody was explaining what was going on with the wartime, what affected people's behavior during wartime. There were some analysis of behavior during rocket attacks in Israel. This was something about risk perception, but samples were pretty small, not representative. They were very much selective bias. So this was very much descriptive study, and we decided to make it slightly more proper. Also, there were some behavioral studies of evacuation of children from London Blitz during the Second World War to foster families, but again, this was mostly descriptive. It didn't provide any reasons. And also there was some general literature on some behavioral biases during the war. There were something, but again, the literature is very, very scarce. So we kind of paving path for this research during the wartime. So in the literature, several issues are found. So for example, there is survival bias. So once we are talking about evacuation behavior, we can ask only those who survived. Unfortunately, those people who did not evacuate and died because of that will never answer our questions why they did not evacuate. So this is also statistically, this is a kind of a bias here. And also selection issues. Not all people would like to answer that pretty sensitive questions about the war experience. And this also cuts a sample towards those who have a little bit, I would say, stronger nerves, maybe, I don't know. But this is very sensitive issue. And when we talk to people unofficially before the study, we understood that we kind of touching very sensitive topics. So we try to formulate the questions as gently as possible. And also the problem with the waiting issue. During this war, about 10 million people left their homes at some moment. So the question is, what is the sample? What kind of population the sample describes? What is the underlying population? What are the weights of different characteristics in this population? So we decided to concentrate on the pre-war population, taking all the risks of that, but definitely if we would like to study this more, like to study refugees or study IDPs, this is internally displaced persons, this is probably has to be amended somehow to change the weights of people in the general sample. And also, it looks like if we start talking, asking questions about what was your behavior during the war, what was your thoughts during the war, there's usually danger that people have some certain projections, like mental projections in their answers. And this is also clutters the answers a little bit. This was the reason why we decided to move very, very fast, and we decided to ask people when less than half a year passed after the war started. Because if we ask the same people the same questions now, we would get completely different results. And this is unfortunately the problem for many surveys, because this kind of surveys are quite expensive. This one particularly would cost something like $6,000 or $7,000, and this was like the minimum of that. And to get this money quickly during the war is usually next to impossible. That is why it's very difficult to collect very good data during the war, and after the war, it's already too late. So now this is what we have found. We found that approximately half of people never left the city. And those who left, majority of them left for the evacuation purposes. That means they left for over a week. And some people evacuated their families and returned back. So we consider them as also evacuees, even though because they also faced the same decisions as evacuees. We collected about 2,000 observations. About 1,800 of them were useful. So that means people answered all the questions that we needed, and our ultimate sample is something like 1,800. So this was the regions from which people evacuated the most. This was obviously Kiev and the region, and also Chernihiv, Mykolaiv, and Kharkiv. About a half of the population of these regions reported that they left their home city at least for a week. Among those who left, about a third remained in their own region. About more than a half moved to another region, mostly western or central Ukraine. Unofficially, this is Lviv, Uzhhorod, and Vinnytsia. So these are three cities which probably took the absolute majority of people. And the remaining 12% went abroad, and this number more or less represents the share of Ukrainians who left abroad. This is again shows that our sample is more or less representative. Once we are talking about the number of people who went abroad on the peak, we are talking about at least 7 million people, maybe even 8, according to United Nations. So this is also about this 12%. Those who evacuated, 15% evacuated and stayed there. 26% evacuated and got back. So now we are looking at the red and the blue parts of the circle, and these are those who evacuated. So by the end of July, approximately 2/3 of those who evacuated already got back to their home city. Those who did not evacuate, about 55% of them did not evacuate, and those who did not evacuate, about half of them actually considered evacuating. So they did not evacuate due to some reasons. For example, they were afraid, or they did not have transportation, housing, money, or whatever. But behavior of those people who stayed, their attitudes to risks and their concerns about evacuation are very similar to those who actually evacuated and never returned. So those people in the green sector and those people in the red sector, they are somehow similar. So we call them in Ukrainian "polochani," which basically means that they could be a little bit scared. I understand that this is a little bit sarcastic way to call this, but in reality, it looks like evacuation did not fulfill the purpose to evacuate everybody who wanted, because even though a lot of people evacuated, even more people wanted to evacuate. But on the other hand, those who did not evacuate, they were also in the situation of imminent danger for their life. And the question was how to get them out of the cities as well, especially from Kharkiv, especially from Chernihiv, and even from Kiev during the first couple of weeks of the war. So this was some econometric analysis. Basically what it says, if we look at the coefficients with those stars, these are the coefficients which are seen to be important. And this is what we see. The gender itself did not very much explain decision of people to evacuate. However, what explained is availability of children. So not females, but females with children evacuated most likely, and this is obvious. Obviously. Also, it looks like people who were quite rich, or at least those who had who were kind of middle class, high middle class, or rich people, they were evacuated more willingly. So those who were pretty poor, that means those who said that they could barely afford only food, they did not evacuate it willingly. Also, we see very clear pattern with age, whether we measure age in years or we measured age in age cohorts or age groups. We clearly saw that older people did not want to evacuate, and the older they were, the less they were willing to evacuate. Also, if people lived in their home city or in their apartment for more than 12 years, which also again points to older people, the probability that they evacuated fell something like by a third. Another interesting fact, the family size did not affect very much vacation decision. Availability of pets, it seems that people with pets evacuate less willingly. What is interesting, in all regressions, people whose native language was Russian evacuated less willingly. Or in other words, from different conversations, from non-statistical data, but from interviews, we found out that people who spoke mostly Ukrainian at home, they considered that they were in more danger. And we are talking about east and south of Ukraine. This is mostly Russian-speaking regions, so people who spoke Ukrainian were in minority. And these people, and these were cities, right? So people in the cities considered that they were probably in more danger, which is why they were more likely to evacuate. Another variable which is not shown over here, but which is also extremely important, is availability of the car. People with the car almost definitely evacuated. It doesn't matter what car it was. It could be something brand new. It could be 25-year-old Zaporozhets, but still people would consider evacuating if they had a car, despite all the problems with the block posts, roads, lack of gas, lack of water, whatever. People with a car evacuated more willingly. Then, obviously, women, married people, families with children were slightly more likely to leave. Older people evacuated less willingly. At least half of people in category 18-34 evacuated. However, less than 30% evacuated in category 45 plus. We don't know anything about population 60 plus, but I kind of believe that the share of that population was much smaller. My parents who were 70, they said that we don't want to live anyway, and you must leave. So just leave us alone, leave us behind and go. Also, the larger the family, the less likely they were to evacuate. And when we discussed this issue with the Donetsk administration, they said the larger family were mostly poor. And one of the reasons why they did not evacuate, sometimes they said that we don't have any suitable clothes and we don't want to look as we are to evacuate somewhere, so we would rather stay. Because we kind of feel very much ashamed that we do not have any clothes, any good clothes to go to some another place. Also, people who were more educated evacuated more willingly, and this is obviously because they had more sources of information, they were reading more, so they could perceive danger much better. Also, if responses didn't have relatives in the same city, they were less likely to go, which is kind of strange. But mostly, very often, some people would try to evacuate their families. That is probably why. Also, we saw that that income was one of the important factors why people evacuated. Over 80% of those who were from the poorest families, and we define poor as those who report they barely have money for the food. Over 80% of them stayed. And almost half of the high income categories left. And high income are those who say that we could afford pretty much everything, or we could afford everything except probably big ticket items like apartment or car. So these are approximately 15% of such people in our sample, and over 80% of over half of them actually left, whereas about 80% of the poorest state. Once we are talking about those who were leaving, about 60% of the car owners reported they took somebody from outside of their household with them in the car. We evacuated with 2 cars, and as I said, we made a stop in Abukhiev to pick up a family, which we found quite randomly the day before we decided to leave. So we didn't know them closely. And this was the story with many people who left, especially if you see those cars which were shelled or which were shot. Very often there were several families in the same car. Also, once we are trying to understand what drove people's decision to leave, we found that physical possibility to use the evacuation bus, about 40% of people reported that this was an important reason for them. Or availability or possibility to join somebody who was living on a personal transport. It's also about 40%. People from the east and from the north reported that evacuation corridors were important for them, or at least they perceived that the route was more or less safe. Also, the most important reason was obviously that housing was offered at the destination place, and this was a part of our answer what affects evacuation decisions. We also found that approximately 16% of respondents reported to have at least some approximate, some vague evacuation plan by the beginning of war. The government was saying, starting approximately February 10th, February 15th, that the war could start, so you should have a plan, you should have some kind of that to go back, some necessities packed all together, and so forth. But we see that only a very tiny, about 1/7 part of the population had this to go back. Those who had this plan, 2/3 of them left. Those who did not have this plan, 2/3 of them stayed. So this ultimate preparation, this mental preparation to leave, played out a very important role for them. Also, we have a tiny share of those who were already internally displaced persons, those who left their homes after the war started in Donbass in 2014-15. And these people already knew what it means to be shelled, what it means to be in the situation of war. So about 60% of them left. Those who were not IDPs, only 40% left, only 40% left. Also, a lot of people reported that they witnessed some military actions, enemy military equipment, bombing, fire, shooting. But it was a bit strange because even in Kiev, it is the share of those who reported that they had seen some enemy military equipment was pretty high. And I kind of don't buy this argument because I believe that most people could probably see this in Telegram channels, on the TV, but not alive, not in person, not eyewitness all this. However, people answered as they answered, and by all means, about 90% of the entire population witnessed at least something. At least everybody, or almost everybody, heard shootings. Everybody heard the blasts from the rockets or anti-missile systems. Some people saw fires. Some people saw fire nearby. This was the very heavy shelling happened in all cities of Ukraine. So at least 90% of the population of our sample, they reported that they were witnessing at least one military action on their own eyes. And I think this is important to understand how people believed about the war and what people thought about possible risk during the war. So we asked them some questions about the risk, something like, do you believe that if you stay in the city, something would happen to you? Or those who stayed, do you think there was a possibility that something would happen at the city where you stayed? And the questions were like that. So I or some of my relatives could be killed or seriously injured, or there could be some illegal actions, some violence, rape, robbery could be committed against me or my family if I stay here, or if I stay, this could happen. Or there could be some problems with food or with infrastructure. Or some people believed it might be possible that the city could be occupied by the Russian army, or some people believe they could be killed by the destruction damage of their house, or a rocket could hit their house. And we see this at the distribution of all answers, and we see that those people who evacuated and didn't come back, and those people who did not evacuate but considered evacuation, the distribution of their dangers, the number of how many situations they perceive as dangerous, they're kind of similar. On the other hand, those who did not evacuate, did not consider, and those who evacuated but later came back, the distribution of their risks also seems quite similar. And if you look at this risk by risk, we see a very similar picture over here. What is important from this table is that, for example, about 75% perceived the situation that they could be killed if they stay in the city. Whether or not they stayed, all of them perceived that this was a chance. And also, once they were thinking about how exactly they could be killed, they perceived that they could be buried under the rubble of their house. And this is also quite important, especially this is important for communication issues. So if you repeat that you should leave because otherwise you can be killed, it does not perceived as the danger because people have already kind of put it through themselves as a possible danger. So this is not something new and not something shocking, and constantly repeating people that you should leave because you can be killed becomes very inefficient. And this was one of the major findings that we immediately reported to the officials, because this is what they used. The policemen went from house to house and repeated again and again, you should leave because you could be killed. And the answer was, yes, we know that we can be killed, but we would like to stay in our house. So that obviously this argument doesn't work. Also, another interesting thing that the risk of occupation was perceived as the lowest by all different categories of these people. And this is also kind of interesting. This shows how much people trust the army and how much they trust that the army could protect their city. Also, we ask about possible concerns along the way. So the question was, before I left the city, I did not evacuate because, and again, something. And those concerns were something about housing, money, or not being able to find transport, or that the road would be difficult and tiring. This was especially true for people who didn't have very good health, or for older people. And also the similar question was that I could not withstand the road because I had poor health, or because the road might be dangerous because of the shelling, shooting, and so forth. And again, here we see quite very similar distribution of answers of those who evacuated as one group, and another group of those who did not evacuate. And if you look at the one by one, we see very similar. So a lot of people perceive the road as dangerous, but those who evacuated, they didn't care much about housing. They simply wanted to leave. Those who did not evacuate, they were really concerned about housing. But those who evacuated, they were more concerned about perils of the road. And those who did not, they basically did not take this into account. And really, evacuation was a pretty demanding task. Whether you go by car or you go by train, you go by bus, the roads were full, trains were full, people were literally sitting on the floor in the trains, or they were sitting for hours on those block posts. So this was something like that. And most people perceived that, that the road was danger. So we see that depending on whether or not people evacuated, the different situations were perceived as concerning, as those which could bring them some troubles along the way. And we see that there is a very clear group for all answers, for those who evacuated, whether or not they returned, and those who did not. And this is another possible manifestation of this mental projection. So those who evacuated, they already had their evacuation experience. So we cannot definitely tell whether or not those concerns appeared before the evacuation experience or already after. And this is what I'm saying about the danger of collecting this social data after the conflict is over or the war is over, because if we collect something during the war, the memory is still fresh. But since everything happens very quickly, it might be possible that after the war, a lot of memories got cluttered with lots of experiences, with experiences from different media, experiences of different people. So the answers may not necessarily be already precise. And then we conducted this behavioral experiment. We asked people several evacuation messages. The first was kind of control. We took the message from messages of one of military administration, so they were kind of real messages that were aired sometimes later. And the control message, the main message, was due to armed aggression by Russia, critical situation is developing around your city. We urge you to act judiciously on the issue of evacuation, leave as soon as possible. This was the control message. And then there were several experimental. So the first was the same one, but we added some save your life or life your family, life your relatives and children. So this evacuation saves lives. This is kind of saving frame. Or there was another one, almost every day civilians die, so don't put yourself, your children and relatives at risk. This was the frame of death. And another was you risk running out of water, gas, and electricity. That is why you should leave as soon as possible. This was the frame of loss. This was kind of behavioral trick, frame of loss of utilities. And finally, there was the frame of altruism. By evacuating, you save your city's limited resources for the militaries. And this was also something that we would like to test, whether or not people believe that their resources would be needed for the militaries. So these were 5 major messages, and we also had the setting which was called a plan. Another 5 messages were the same as before, but we also added some practical information. Something about transportation, meeting place, destination point, instructions what to take with them, and so forth. And then we have shown exactly 1 message to every person. So we randomly selected people into 10 groups, and each group was shown exactly 1 message. And after that message, we asked them if you needed to convince residents of your city to evacuate, and just evaluate on the scale from 0 to 10 how effective this message is going to be. So we didn't ask people's perception about the message. We tried to elicit projection from those people. This is also kind of common methodological trick. This is not something that we invented. We found this in the literature, and we decided that this would work. In our previous papers that we did some studies on COVID vaccination, we found that there is huge correlation between questions. What do you think, what other people think about COVID, for example, and what do you think about COVID? And it looks like when people thought about other people thinking, they kind of substituted their own thinking there. So this is a very common psychological trick, and we decided to use it in this situation as well. So this is what we found. I think what is interesting here, this chart on the left, the left bars, they show a reaction to the messages with no plan. And the right bars show reaction to the messages with a plan. And we see that in all situations except the last one with the altruism, the plan works much better. What it means? It means that if you present some message to people, some message about evacuation, and you attach some steps, some manageable steps to this message, people kind of perceive it much better, and they're more likely to evacuate. We also ran a regression analysis, and we found that plan on the message is indeed a very important predictor of the evacuation probability. But what is more interesting, the motivation per se doesn't work much. There is no much difference what kind of message you are going to show to the people, either control message or frame of death or frame of losing life, or frame of saving life, or frame of losing utilities, doesn't matter. The difference between those frames is almost negligible. What is the most important is this belief in the plan and how people react to the plan. So the plan works much better than without a plan, and also considering the fact that people who already had some kind of plan beforehand, and those people evacuated more willingly, it looks like the plan works indeed. So it looks like those who are presented some government, we call it government plan, so the plan in the message, or those who had their own plan, those who plan in advance, or those who hear some plan immediately, the plan works much better. And this is what we convey to this Donetsk administration when we were talking about evacuation. We said that if you want people to leave, you have to present them some picture of the future. You should not present them the picture of the danger. You should present them the picture of how they are going, where they are going, what they're going to do there, how they're going to get there, and so forth. And this is what they're trying to do. They said that, okay, we're trying to have some agreements with different administrations, and we explained our candidates for evacuation that they are going to be placed in some dorms outside, and somebody is waiting for them, so they're not going anywhere. They're not going to nowhere. They're going anywhere, and somebody is expecting them. And I think this was very valuable finding of this particular experiment, of this particular survey. Also, we tried to understand who was better responding to the plan, and we found that females were responding to the plan much better. So for the males, the difference was not significant. For females, the difference was very significant. But also, people who had their own plan, they did not respond to the government plan very much, even though the difference was slightly better. But people who did not have any plan in place, their own plan, they immediately responded to this plan from the government. Which again means that once we are dealing with some communication, we have to provide some ways to go. We have to provide some picture. And if people are in panic and stressed, they don't know what to do and where to go, and they don't know what to expect them, our task as communicators and public officials is to provide them this picture so that people would visualize that and follow this. So, this is basically it. This paper actually, if you want. And what we are going to do next, we would like to see at some non-tangible factors which are predictors of evacuation and returning behavior. Something about language or religion or historical events or relatives, or something about identity, whether people identify themselves with Ukraine, whether people identify themselves with the place where they live. Because those things, they may also affect, and there are some studies in psychology, sociology that show that this stuff actually also may work. So yes, it is possible to give people some money and they would probably go. But it looks like the money we are talking about is extremely huge. So we are talking about tens of thousands of hryvnias to motivate people to evacuate. And definitely this is not the amount that state administrations actually has in their possession. But if instead we try to include something like plans or something like picture of the future or something like trying to describe possible next steps, people might be willing to leave even without any immediate financial support. Financial support and housing are indeed important. But we still see that some people are provided housing and some people are not provided housing, and still people do not leave. That is why for people to leave, we need to provide some additional motivation, and this motivation comes from behavioral studies. So I guess this is what I wanted to tell. So we have about 15 minutes to questions. So if you want, ask me something. I'm open for the questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Volodymyr, for this wonderful presentation. Maybe you can stop sharing your screen so we can see colleagues better. Thank you. Please, Serhiy Pakhomenko, you have a question.
Thank you very much, dear Vladimir, for your fundamental research and report. Sorry, probably I missed this information due to my English listening, but just in case, I would like to ask you, have you distinguished your data and results according to regions, Ukrainian regions, and even cities which were occupied by Russia? The thing is that military situation in different cities were completely different, and correspondingly it influenced motivation, character, and even physical possibility for evacuation.
Thank you, Sergey. Yes, we consider that. We conducted the survey in the regions which were directly affected by the war, which was it's me again. The regions of Ukraine
Sarah, I see you're talking, but we cannot hear you.
I kind of have some strange problems with connections right now. I will try to get connected by the wire now, so they will not see my face, but hope it will be a little bit better. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So, could you hear my answer, Sergey, more or less?
No, I couldn't.
Okay. Again, we conducted the survey only in the regions which were directly affected by the war. So these were the north of Ukraine, east of Ukraine, and the south of Ukraine, only except Donbass and except Kherson.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to control for that, and in the regression analysis, we did not find much difference in the behavior of the people. In the regression analysis, it looks like people from Kharkiv expressed pretty much the same concerns about the evacuation and about the danger as people from Kiev. Moreover, what was explaining the behavior the most is behavior during the first days of the war. So absolute majority of those who evacuated during the first weeks, and absolute majority of those who came back are those who evacuated during those first 2 weeks. So that means there was some panic, people evacuated, and after that, people decided to get back.
Thank you.
Okay.
Still cannot hear you, Sarah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Dear colleagues, I'm stepping in. Yeah, so the floor for our discussion is open. So if you have any question, just raise your hand or simply ask your question. It's a very tricky.
Just one remark. Just one
Yes,
remark,
please do.
Volodymyr.
Mhm.
Volodymyr, you remind me. Indeed, a car was the issue of life or death at that time.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't know if you were in Irpin. There was like a huge pile of those cars that were burned during the evacuation. So this was some chance the matter of death. People didn't know where to go. My colleague actually took this route through Irpin, Bucha, and Gostomel in the first day and the first hours, and he somehow went through. But everybody who followed him, some were either shot or were diverted to different routes. That is why we decided to go to Obuchiv, which is to the south of Ukraine, and not even getting to Odessa, to Kiev-Odessa road, because we thought that the road to Obuchiv was the least dangerous. So it's, but this was, unfortunately, this was the reason why people were talking about these corridors, that people perceive this as a danger.
Cars cars were leaving Mariupol full with people, with pets on the roofs. Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And
yes, unfortunately.
have you ever heard about recent scandal on movie Yurik?
No, I didn't follow that. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Maybe we discuss on it later. Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, you can use our Telegram channel for our discussions. Please do so. And right now we have another question. Please, Anna.
Thanks a lot. It's just a very small question. Volodymyr, thank you so much for such an interesting presentation and a very professional study. Please tell, has this research been published already? If there is any link where we can read this.
The experiment was described in the SSRN paper. I provided the link at the very end. I will put it in chat. A fuller article is being prepared for the Economic Journal right now. So we had this strange decision, which was called reject and resubmit. So we submitted only the experiment. They said that this is not very conclusive. So we added some details about evacuation, about the war, about the sample, and we hope it would come through. So we are working on this right now. We have some time till December to submit, so we'll resubmit it very soon. But the experiment part has already been published, and unfortunately, this is basically it. There is this presentation that I composed, and there is this small report on the experiment.
But please, when the article will be published, share it with us. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people pick it up, like they say this is kind of very interesting issue. Editors of journals don't think that this is interesting for some reason, so I don't know why.
It's their problems.
Yeah, so this is the link to the SSRN paper, so you can follow it right now in the chat.
Thank you, Volodymyr. I had the same question as Anna, so I'm glad you asked it. I'll just remind folks, or actually let you know, that we are preparing a shared Google Drive for our community, and we have a folder there where we will be dropping links to your work, links to your published papers. Everything will be gathered in one place so that folks can access it. So anything you want to provide us, please do, and we'll put it in that shared Google Drive. Other questions for Volodymyr? This was such a rich presentation. I am so impressed that you and your team were able to do this work so quickly. You know, in July, it must have been a huge effort, and it's just so impressive. Other questions for Volodymyr? Well, then I'll take the the privilege of asking a question. I was very interested in the methodology. You know, I'm a qualitative researcher myself. I don't do much survey work at all, and I was just wondering how did you manage to coordinate this, you know, in wartime conditions and covering such a large area? What did that look like? Were you using existing networks? Were you reaching out to new colleagues? What was that process like?
Well, it was basically Franklin's who do the thing. You know, we hired the agency which is called Gradus. This is sociological / marketing agency. They have a phone app. And we were very much considered Gradus because of this app. We knew about that. I worked with the data before. I was not very much happy with the fact that the sample only covers urban residents and only from cities 50,000 plus and only people under 60. However, since it was the middle of the summer, a lot of people who evacuated and left Ukraine altogether still could have this app on their phones even though they were abroad. And this was important for us to take everybody from around Ukraine and from around Europe. And Gradus had a panel of about 50,000 people. And when we were talking to them about the sampling, we said them whom we wanted to have in our sample, and they had combined the sample for us. So this was the effort. Some people from the team basically chipped in their research money, research budgets into this one, and this is how we collected this all. This is again, this is not an easy way to finance research right now, because the one that we have on the table right now would cost even more, and we don't know if we can apply for some grant somewhere. Because we would like to ask people in Europe about their intentions to come back to Ukraine, and we would like to understand the motives of those who stay, again, beyond financial and beyond security reasons, because financial security reasons, they're kind of clear, but still a lot of people come back to Ukraine now having those issues in hand. That means it is still not very safe in Kharkiv and people get back to Kharkiv. And we would like to understand why. Because this is something that required by now by the Ministry of Economics, Ministry of Social Policy, and this is why we would like to do this research.
Thank you so much.
And we're also aware about lots of qualitative studies of Ukrainian refugees and IDPs. A lot of studies have been conducted in Germany, in Poland, so we already can get to at least some of those hypotheses, and we can at least understand what's going on at the level of the stories. We just don't know how those stories are typical or how they are unique. But we would like to have a little bit more numerical picture of what's going on.
Okay, well, we are at the hour, and it has been a very interesting hour indeed. Thank you so much, Volodymyr Vakhitov, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you, Vitaly Chernoivanenko, for your wonderful presentation. Very different topics, but both equally fascinating and important. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We will be in touch with more details about the program, and look forward to seeing you at our next seminars, which will be already in October, and we will send out more information about those as it's available. So thanks again for joining, everyone, and we will see you next time and be in touch on email and Telegram.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.